Yeah. Normally not many people come on the 5:30 ones.
It was
Oh, thank you.
JD shared it.
Yeah, I wonder.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February 21st meeting of the Ames Community School District Board of Directors. I will call the meeting to order and entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Smith, seconded by Beerbaum. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Passes 6-0. Director Beerbaum, will you please read our purpose statement?
The Ames Community School District commits to equity and access and empowers every individual to reach their full personal and educational potential.
Thank you. And just a note for anyone attending in person or virtually, if you would like to make a comment tonight, either as part of the public forum or a comment on one of our discussion items, we have sign-up sheets on either side of the room. Or if you are online, you can click the link and sign up on the link that's provided. And we'll give about 5 more minutes for folks to sign up before we collect those sheets. Okay, moving on to our first agenda item is our Celebration and Recognition Golden Apple Award. And I'll turn it over to Director Smith.
You know, we're going to have a great school board meeting when we can start with a celebration. So I'm happy to be able to do that. Just last week, Patty Allen, 3rd grade teacher at Edwards Elementary, was surprised as being a Golden Apple Award winner through WHO 13. I'll have her share, you know, the reaction of the students, which I just learned about, so that's pretty fun. But they recorded a segment with Miss Allen. They're going to air it in March. A couple takeaways that I learned as I was starting to learn about this was Miss Allen is the first 2-time award winner for the Golden Apple, so that's really fun. And the really neat thing, and the really neat thing is, you know, WHO says that they get over 50 applicants every single month, and so to be able to move through that and get this recognition is really great. So it started with the students in her class, with the help of, you know, parents as well, but it's really, really exciting. I'm glad that we can start our school board meeting off like this.
Thank you, Eric. I'd like to thank the board for this recognition. It's very meaningful to me, and I appreciate it very much. Just to share with you, when they first came into our classroom, the children stood up and they were shouting, "We won! We won!" They were so excited for all of us. So, I'm very thankful that my teaching career has followed this path, and I've had the chance to work with just extraordinary students and families and educators in the 22 years I've been here in Ames. And I'm just very thankful that I can be part of the Ames Community School District. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just asked Sabrina if I could say something because I feel very privileged because our family 2 times over has had Mrs. Allen in 3rd grade, and I can attest to what an amazing teacher she is. And I was just sent to tears when I learned that you were winning this for the 2nd time, and it is absolutely deserved. So thank you, Patty, for everything you give to all of our kids in this district.
All right, we will move on to our discussion items. And the first item is the ACSD system blueprint. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Vincent.
Yes, thank you. So I just asked for the first slide to be brought up if we could. The whole purpose of having this just as an intro as we get into the committee discussion is just to hopefully paint a picture or keep a picture in our mind about where are we in the conversation. This is not an original diagram at all. And our newest board members, you have a pamphlet at your place that other board members received earlier in the fall that just comes from some systems thinking type work. You probably have been exposed to the same thing, maybe a different author, maybe a different field. But the notion is systems are designed to get the results that they get. So if we have results that we are proud of, then we can rest assured that our system has some structure in place that's helping us to get there. And similarly, if we have components of our system that we would like to shift, it gives us the way to think about where should we put our energy or our focus, what's our hypothesis about how we can make the change that we want to make. The other part of this helps us based on the conversation we had in our work session most recently about, so whose work is it anyway? And this model would say, as directors, if you help keep us focused on what's that system we want to create, that vision, and what's the purpose, which we just heard, that we want to keep front and center, that's where your work really helps make a difference in the system. You then provide that direction. It helps those of us that work at your request above the line in those hypotheses, the actions, and getting in even to the detail of the tactics. So it's just a way that maybe together we can all help each other in our conversations. Think about which part of the system are we really focusing on and what kind of questions does that raise. So that was the whole intent of just trying to continue that work session conversation in a way that might be helpful to us as we go into our discussions this evening. I'd entertain any comments or questions. Okay, final part would be as a central office group, we have tried to think of the work that you discussed with us in that last work session about how would we be helpful to you. And we will try in our meetings going forward to make sure in the committees that we are trying to summarize those main points and maybe reflecting when we hear questions, making sure we're asking for clarification that the part of the system we can affect and helping you articulate with us what are you trying to focus in terms of that vision or that broad direction. So with that, I think we're ready to move on to the next committee reports.
All right. Oh, yes. Well, just make sure we didn't have any comments on that first discussion item. Okay. And I don't see any online. All right, we will go ahead and move on to our board committee updates, and we'll begin with the equity committee.
So we had a great committee meeting. Anthony and staff described some of the things, as you can see in the meeting minutes, that are going on within the district as far as equity. That'll be the pattern. Every month we'll have that type of update. One thing that's board related that came up is the Intercultural Developmental Inventory, the IDI. We had discussion about whether or not board members would be interested in taking that. It's a common kind of assessment tool, a tool to help with intercultural competence. We thought that all of us would be really interested to do that. So Anthony and his staff will work with us to help board members be able to take that and go through that. Then also there was the beginning of a discussion about defining educational equity, as I think all of us know from discussions we had with Dr. Lawson and with staff here. That's something we want to make sure is part of some of the visioning and planning we're doing. So that'll continue to come forward, and we'll continue to talk about that too. Any questions about anything equity committee related?
All right, we will move on to the mental health committee. Mental health committee met on February 9th. This was our first meeting where we had our new committee members present. So we had 2 of the 3 of them that were able to be present. One is a mental health provider in town, and one is a school counselor here within the district. So they shared a little bit about the anonymous alerts process. Dr. Arnold has been kind of doing an audit of that and understanding how it's working, who has access, who gets the initial emails, and just making sure that folks are aware of that and that students are aware of that. We discussed the mental health screening at the secondary level, and the district staff shared that there'd been a concern by the middle school and high school principals about what happens after the screening, given the shortage of mental health services in the community. So we had a little bit of discussion around that, and ultimately the committee felt that it was still valuable to provide the screening and to provide education wherever possible to parents and follow-up resources as we're able to do that, and continue working with the community on ways that we can identify additional resources. Our final discussion topic, which is kind of something for looking towards the future, is trying to understand if there's a way that we would be able to provide mental health counselors in schools. So we'll do some more kind of investigating on that in the future. And our next meeting will be on March 9th. Policy Committee.
Excuse me, we met on last Wednesday, right? Thursday, February 17th. Sorry, I was pulling the data. And made it through another chunk of policies, just updating to meet IASB recommendations and legal requirements. And we'll have those to discuss here in a minute too. I'll save it for discussion.
Very good. Are there any, let's see here, any public comments on our board committee updates? We don't have anyone on the list or anyone on Zoom. So we will go ahead and move on to the new Ames High transition update. And we'll turn it over to Kenneth Dameron.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. My name is Kenneth Dameron. I'm one of the associate principals at Ames High School. In my former life, I was an English teacher, and one of the things I used to teach my kids was when you go to give a speech, you want to try and establish your credibility as quickly as you can with your audience. And so I thought to myself, well, what's my credibility here talking about the new building and Ames High transition? And I thought, well, I've been here 7 months. I wasn't here when the original design was implemented or any of those conversations. I think really what it was is I showed interest, and Director Jerry Peters sunk his teeth into me and said, all right, come along for the ride. We're about to do this together. So, that being said, and all joking aside, we do recognize at the high school that this is a major endeavor, and it's going to be the pride of the community to have such a beautiful high school for our students to learn in. And I think that is shown by how much it passed in the bond, right? I've been in a couple of different systems, one other state, and I've never seen a bond pass that in so much favor of it. So we want to get this right, and I'm hoping that I can buzz through this presentation pretty quickly because I think you have more questions than I probably have answers for, so we'll leave some time for that. So really kind of breaking down the timeline that we have. This is tentative, obviously, as we work through some of the construction phases. It feels like every time we get into a construction meeting, we've been able to avoid a lot of the major detriment in terms of supply issues, and COVID. Story's done a really good job of navigating some waters that I can only imagine their expertise has been able to get us through. And so April 30th is the substantial completion of the new Ames High School. That's the targeted date. That's been on the calendar for a long time, and they're still thinking that a majority of the high school is going to be done at that time. We recognize that there's going to be a lot more work than just the completion of the high school with moving all of our staff members from the current building into the new building. I think I can say this, being a former teacher, somehow teachers collect more stuff than any other profession, and they hang on to it for as long as they can. So we're working through some of that as we go forward. So March 3rd, we're going to have a faculty meeting where we talk through the processes of what it looks like to be moving over there. And then till May 31st is really just packing, labeling boxes, and getting ready for the move as we get into the next part of the phase. So, and then May of 2022, we'll start looking at moving some of non-essential equipment. So if there's classes that have really large equipment, we'll be looking at trying to get some of that over to the new high school prior to the summer rush of all the other things. June, moving company moves boxes and equipment. We're hoping to have that all of June into July. We can get a majority of our materials moved into the new high school. And then August 1st, teachers and staff can occupy the new building. And then we can have a discussion about what that looks like in terms of obviously contract days and everything are going to play a factor into that. So moving materials, again, March to June 30th is really where we're going to focus on a majority of the moving materials from the building we're in into the new high school. So one of the big things is we are asking teachers to take all personal property from the building and take it home with them over the summer. We don't want to be liable for personal belongings, and the moving company doesn't want to be liable for personal belongings. So we'll ask teachers to make sure that anything that would be of personal nature, that it goes home with them when they leave in the early part of June, and it doesn't come back into the building until they occupy their classrooms when the new contract starts. School property will have specific labels and boxes are going to be given to staff. They'll start filling those things with school materials, and then they will be stored on location until the moving company is able to come. I didn't put it up because we're still finalizing the final details of it, but we will have labels that essentially say teacher's name, what classroom they're from, where they're going, and then they'll be labeled by color. So when the moving company comes, they know that this is going to the specific pod where that teacher is. We're trying to eliminate boxes ending up where they're not supposed to be when we've had that move. And so teachers can just come in and access those materials that they need. We are still developing the plan for staging locations, recognizing that most teachers aren't going to be able to house 40 boxes in their classroom. Some ideas that we've currently thrown out is using portions of the media center for certain departments, using behind the bleachers after activities is done. We've talked about using the far gym that we have. There's just going to be various locations that we try and provide for staff members to store those materials until we can move them in June. Two things that I think complicate that. One is we are short-staffed still at the custodial level. And so asking teachers to move from the English hall all the way down to the other side of the gym is a little bit of a far ask. And so we're trying to come up with some creative solutions and how we can move materials from one end of the building to the other. And then I also always worry about just boxes full of materials sitting unsupervised. And so we're going to try and time that out to make sure there's minimal tampering with those boxes if it's been unsupervised. We are going to be hiring a moving company to do the major lifting. That's going to be working through Director Peters. He's contacted, I believe, several companies. I'm not sure if he's finalized one yet, but they'll do that moving in June. So it's really packing it up and moving it. That's the moving materials part. The moving people part, which I think you probably have the most questions about, and I maybe still don't have those answers, but August 1st is when teachers can begin setting up for the 2022-2023 school year. I believe a tentative calendar, we'd be looking at the second week for their contract to start. So I would anticipate a majority of our staff not accessing that until their contract starts. And so I can kind of talk through in my head the way I envision some of the supports that we're going to provide so that they're ready to go on that first day of school. So another portion that we've been working across is we do have summer school at the high school. We will not be able to provide that this summer in the Ames High building. Once we move out and the construction company will take possession of the old Ames High School, and students won't, it becomes a construction site at that point. So we have arranged to have the summer school at Ames Middle School. And we're working on the current plans of what exactly that looks like in terms of transportation. Is there transportation involved with that from middle school? I've been meeting with Dr. Osser and including Dr. Hawkins in conversations about summer school. So we'll work through the logistics of that at the middle school. The middle school assistant principals and principals might have a phone to pick, but it is what it is for this year, I think. So summer activities are being coordinated with Lyle and Jerry. So Lyle Fetter's our activities director, and Jerry are working on what do summer activities look like in the new building. It gets complicated because portions of the building throughout the summer are still going to be under construction, and we wouldn't want students to access those parts of the building. So they're working on a plan to try and segment some of that. So if it's the weight room kind of down in the southwest corner of the building, can students access that from a point where they're not going to be going through the rest of the building as they work through substantial completion in the classrooms? I know the construction company is putting a priority on getting classrooms done first, so those could be done and it wouldn't necessarily be a major issue. Also the gym, all of those things that we're looking at. One thing we know for sure is that the swimming pool won't be open during the summer. That will open at the start of the girls' fall season. So that's kind of those things, but there is a plan. There's conversations going on with all three groups, any group that's going to be trying to access volleyball, basketball. We're trying to work on contingency plans for them to be in there. And if ultimately it comes down as we get into construction, they're not able to be in there, what accommodations can we make and alternate arrangements can we try and provide to make sure that they're still being able to participate in those activities over the summer. So kind of we get there, yay, we have a high school to get into. Usually we try and orient about 350 students to this new experience, probably the most autonomous part of their life that they've ever been in. We have the challenge of doing that for 4 classes. You usually rely a lot on upperclassmen knowledge and kind of the unwritten rules of high school, like, hey, this is where we line up for lunch. This is how we do those things. They can see students to do that. Well, we're going to be working through all of that being new to every one of our students. And so we want to be really explicit with what our expectations are, how those routines are developed. And so right now, we kind of had a new building committee, and we built a subcommittee off of that of teachers that is working on what would an orientation process look like. I was very impressed with the work that our teachers have done on the freshman orientation. I think it's been a really successful day for us. Now we're just trying to scale that up for a whole school. And so how would we go about doing that? Currently, it's just teachers and administration talking, and then we're going to loop in student leader voices to try and get their input of like, hey, how would it be best to teach you kind of these new routines? Those are kind of the 3 main stakeholder groups that we've engaged in that. And so also waiting a little bit on the calendar, so then we can start really planning on what that looks like in terms of the first part of the school year. So community tours in Ames High, not being from the community, I recognize that this is a really important piece. We have one counselor that says she's going to strap herself to the bulldozer before they demo the old Ames High. So we know we have to do justice for giving people the opportunity to say goodbye to their memories of where they came in their formative years. And so we are planning open house nights for Ames alumni. Those potential dates will start in April. We'll communicate that through the district, and then we'll have opportunities for students and families to walk through the old Ames High before we turn it over to the construction company. We're also planning for community tours. I don't know if I've been a part of any meeting with Director Peters where somebody doesn't ask her, hey, when can I see the building, right? Everybody wants to see it, and rightfully so. It's going to be beautiful, but we're currently working on what those tours look like. And how we're going to open that up to the community. It's always a sticking point with the construction company and their liability piece. Auction and community sale. We are working on a community sale that's going to be conducted through an online auction. We always get kind of in the weeds of what's legally can we sell that's public property, what's financially feasible for us to sell. Are we going to end up losing money? I know we've been through this process a lot in the elementaries and middle school. The high school is kind of a whole nother set of just, there's a lot more equipment. There's a lot more to either auction off or give away. And then we're talking about the potential for an in-person community sale, and we're working through those specific barriers or obstacles that might be presented if we try and go that route. Okay, sorry, I talked really fast. I know you probably have more questions, so it's probably best if I let you ask me some questions, but I just want to say thank you. I know that you have been very supportive throughout the whole process, and I do want to give a shout out to Jerry. This is a monumental task, and with the amount of turnover that we've had in administration at the high school, I'm very thankful that he's been on board the whole time to keep this thing on the rails, and we're looking forward to an absolutely beautiful building. So what questions do you have for me at this point? I don't think that's appropriate. Like, what's the decorum that we use? Is that how you do it? I don't think so.
Yeah, that's fine. Anybody have questions? I'll say thank you for taking this on and being new to jump right into this.
It's been fun. It's been a really interesting process, and I think we've been able to involve teachers in the process a little bit more than initially was let on, and I think they've done a really good job of creating what's going to be a space that they want to work in, and hopefully we can help with teacher retention as well as they take ownership in the new building. I think they're finally starting to see it. A lot of them have been there a long time. It's been home for a long time, and so change is scary for people, but I think we're slowly massaging them to get to the vision of what a beautiful school it's going to be. Sometimes when we have leaks in the roof or different things, we'll be like, you sure we should stay here? The place we want to be, sure. I know you had sent me some questions. I don't know if you want me to answer those.
They were from Michelle, I think, and I don't,
You hit, I think. you
Yeah,
hit
I
the
don't think there
majority of
were
them.
any that were not answered. so.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So I have, this is a minor thing. I imagine there are going to be a lot of boxes out of place when you arrive. So the second week of August, I imagine, is going to be nuts in the new building. Do you have thoughts about how you're going to manage the nutsiness of that second week of August?
That's a really good question. I think, Jay, what did you tell me was the box record for elementary? 200, someone had 200 boxes that they transferred from elementary. So in my initial thought in the conversation, just briefly, that Director Peters and I have had is having disposal and dumpsters for them to take care of all of that stuff. We know, at least from what I've understood, is sometimes the public takes advantage of having dumpsters and filling those before we can fill them. But yeah, it's a process for us to kind of assess how many we'll need and then working on disposal through that part of it.
I just wanted to compliment you on the idea of involving students in that orientation side. I recommend both as kind of a parent community member. I'd love to see students as involved as possible in that first year and kind of delineating a little bit of like what's unique about this building and how can we use it and where do we do stuff, you know. It's their place, so anything we can do to do more of that would be great, I would think.
And not that this is part of this presentation, but I think our current administration is looking for new ways to involve student voice as much as we can. It's a process to get those structures in place to make it effective, but we would agree that we want our students to take ownership in their learning.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come present.
Thank you.
Any comments from the public on the Ames High transition update? We don't have any signed up, but I will give people the option since we just changed the process. Okay, doesn't look like we have any. We will move on to our teaching and learning update. And we'll have the 2022-23 and 2023-24 school calendars and Dr. Hawkins.
Good evening, board.
Good evening.
Hope everybody's doing well. I will say, had I had any clue how entertaining Mr. Damron would have been, I would have asked to go in a different order. He just did a wonderful job, and we sure appreciate his work at the high school. So I'm here tonight to present to you the draft or the proposed 2022-23 school calendar. We also have the 23-24 school calendar that follows the same principles. I'd like to kind of walk you through the process that has gone on up to this point to get us to this stage. Maybe point a few highlights in the calendar that are aligned to the priorities identified by the committee that worked on this, and then answer whatever questions you might have. So the first thing that I would point out is that there was a committee that did this work. A committee of 20, a little over 20 members, 21 I believe to be precise, comprised of building administrators, teachers, students, parents, community members, union members, and district office staff. All came together on multiple occasions. Our first meeting was in mid-December, and at that meeting we looked at the state code around the requirements for the use of time. There's a state code that says how many instructional hours we have to have, how many hours of professional development we have to have. There's a board policy that talks about length of school day. So we reviewed our own board policies to make sure that all of the things that we were going to do were grounded in our own policies and state code. We then spent a few minutes examining our current use of time. How are we currently structuring our calendars as of December 16th? And then the team spent the remainder of the meeting establishing some priorities. So knowing what board policy and code says and knowing how we're using time currently, what do you really want to get out of a calendar? And it was important at that meeting, we had great representation, again, student voice, parent voice, community member voice. And so I want to walk through just a few of the priorities that team commonly identified. The number one priority that the team identified, the most overwhelmingly consistent feedback, we got was 2 weeks at winter break. I've joked with a few other groups that probably is what happens when you ask a committee on December 16th what they would really value in a calendar. But that's what came out as the #1 priority. They also identified moving elementary professional development to match the full days of the secondary model. That was the #2 most common priority, and you'll see in the proposed calendars that that's indeed accomplished. One of the ask was to bring back conference preparation days. So before parent-teacher conferences occur, could we have some time to make sure that we're really coming as best prepared for those conferences as we possibly can? Could we have a longer summer break? Is it possible to end by Memorial Day? Could we even out the start and stop time? So in the past couple calendars since I've been in the district, we've seen our secondary go to school for about 15 minutes longer than our elementary buildings. And the #5 priority identified by that team was, could we even those out, right? And then #6 was, can we ensure the calendar is constructed with a diverse and inclusive lens? Can we look at significant non-Christian holidays and make sure that that's represented or somehow shown in our calendar? I'm really pleased that the calendar that I'm bringing you tonight incorporates all of those top 6 priorities. There are other priorities that I would admit to the board are not accomplished in the calendar. We actually ended up with about 3 pages of priorities, and some of them were, only one person mentioned that priority, but the 6 most common priorities identified by the majority of the committee were able to be accomplished in this calendar. For example, the 7th priority, if you're wondering, well, what didn't make that cut, Jeff? The 7th most popular one was, could we have the Wednesday before Thanksgiving break as a day off for staff? We had a few drafts of the calendar that showed that. We had some drafts that didn't. The drafts that didn't have that got more positive feedback in the end, which kind of alludes to the next step in the process. So a smaller subset of that team then who volunteered to do so took those priorities and created 5 draft calendars that tried to accomplish as many of those priorities as that draft calendar could, right? Once those draft calendars were done, we pulled the full committee back together and said, okay, here's 5 examples of how someone has tried to apply the priorities that we've identified as a committee into this calendar. And then pros and cons for each of those 5 were collected by all the committee members. At that stage, we also released the calendar to all of the principals, because not every principal was a part of that committee. And we also released it to the union executive members. And we synthesized all that feedback into pretty close to the draft you see here. And then one last time, we sent that out to the committee again and the principals in the union to say, anything here that you feel needs to be changed. So in other words, what you see before you tonight is an extremely collaborative process that is designed to maximize the priorities that our teachers, our community members, our parents, our students, our administrators have said are important to them. Some of the highlights that I would point out, other than, yes, we were able to accomplish the top 6 most common priorities, including a 2-week winter break. You'd notice some differences between calendars that maybe I've brought you in the past. There's expanded pre-service schedule. So there's more time built into August than we typically have had for staff in the past, including the addition of the Little Cyclone Teacher Academy, bringing kind of back that optional opportunity for staff to engage in some professional development, oftentimes led by the district and potentially their colleagues at the beginning of the year. There's some flexibility built into this calendar that we haven't necessarily done as a system before. So there's some times in which we're telling staff, we need you to work a contracted day, but you have some choices to whether you work it a few days during the beginning of the year or a day at the end of the year. So whatever works better for you and your family. There's also some flexibility built into the calendar in an opportunity for teachers to say, hey, I do a lot of work outside of the contract day, and could I have one of my contract days be counted towards that? So again, really trying to increase opportunities to honor the fact that we know that our staff do a lot of work outside of contract time and provide some more flexibility in the calendar. This calendar also represents more of a return to our, what I would say, normal instructional hours. Again, the committee asked that we kind of synthesize the secondary and the elementary. The way that was accomplished was by what's recommended to you or proposed at this point. is a 6-hour and 35-minute instructional day. That represents a little bit more time than our elementaries have typically been going to school for the past few calendars, and a little bit less time than our secondaries have been typically going to school for the last few days. But all in all, it does accomplish, including parent-teacher conferences, over, it was 1,120 instructional hours precisely. So it's not over, I'm sorry, it's 1,120 instructional hours, which is a return to, again, where we've been in the past, or actually slightly more. Another thing that another highlight I would say is the identification of religious observances so that we can be cognizant when it comes to scheduling and aware of potential student needs throughout the year. The committee was pretty excited about the inclusion of the religious observances and the denotation within the calendar. And then I know that there was some positive feedback around the fact that the proposed calendar split the semester 84 days to 85 days, which is a nice even split, particularly for our secondary teachers that teach elective classes, and so they don't have to worry about having significantly more time one semester over another. So that's kind of a 30,000-foot overview, or maybe it's more in the weeds, I don't know, of the process that used to get here, some of the highlights, some of the things we were trying to accomplish with this. At this point, I'd be happy to take your questions.
This may not deal with this, but in terms of the dismissal times, those will be established once you work through with transportation. Is that correct?
That's a great lead in. So there are 3 conversations yet to be held. One of them is start and stop times. Yep. And I can talk about that a little bit more if you'd like me to. But so what we wanted to get was like, when is the first day of school and when is break and which days can I plan on professional development? The calendar hasn't typically communicated start and stop times, but that is a conversation that I'd like to have next with the committee. The other thing that you might not see on the proposed calendar that we do need to have is parent-teacher conferences. So I would tell you, we've gotten some different feedback. The elementary has said the current structure of 2 evenings works perfectly for us. We have high attendance. We're really engaging our parents. It's perfect. Our middle school has said, I need another night. Right, we want to have high engagement, and our parents are wanting, they need more time to do that because we have higher student rosters for each teacher. So we're still trying to work through what exactly will parent-teacher conferences look like in the schedule. And then there's one other conversation that's continuing between the union and myself and Director Miller, who are planning our pre-service days on exactly how does some of our new teacher time equate to this new calendar.
Okay, thank you.
It's probably more than what you needed in that.
No, but it's helpful to know, because that is, I mean, it's a common question that we get from families. So helping them to understand, first we talk about start and stop and days off, and then we talk about the next. Yeah. You'll bring that to us whenever.
I will, yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I see it's great that you all have listed all the major religious observances. I think that's really important. So thank you for doing that. Practically, what implication did this have? How did this change the calendar, if at all?
The denotation of the religious observances. I will tell you that we did bring some drafts of the calendar with some of those dates as days off of school, right? Just observing that by not having students report to school. One of the feedback from our community members who's associated with our Jewish community indicated, Jeff, I'm not so sure that what we need is necessarily all of these observances to have days off or time off, but rather could our calendar simply represent that we recognize they're happening so we can be cognizant as we schedule. Okay. So in a direct answer to your question, Director Smith, I don't know that on many of these it impacted whether students are or are not attending school, but the point of it was to acknowledge that there's some observances going on, make sure that our community is cognizant of that, and particularly that our administration is cognizant of it as we plan for different activities and events in our schools.
How do you choose which days to make professional development days? Okay, great.
We have landed on Mondays as a district for our secondary. That was a decision made prior to me getting here, but I'm going to try to do my best of saying this is what I understand. My understanding was that that was a day chosen because it represented a nice opportunity for our families to, if they wanted to and needed to have kind of a 3-day break. But it also represented a day for our staff that wasn't necessarily a Friday. So if we wanted to have that 3-day break, it wasn't a Friday. Our staff attendance rates on Fridays are different than they are on Mondays. And so we chose a Monday to try to maximize staff attendance as well as provide an extended weekend for families if they wanted that break. That's my understanding, I believe. If there's others in the room who would add to that, please do so.
And as far as the specific Mondays chosen, there's not an algorithm or something that you use.
There's not an algorithm, no. We attempted as frequently as we could to go with the second Monday of each month to provide some consistency as much as possible for buildings and families. There wasn't a month that I believe we had more than one per month. There are 2 months that there isn't one scheduled in order to ensure we don't get to count instructional hours for days of professional development. So to ensure that this calendar did represent a return to our normal use of instructional hours, we did not have a professional development every month.
Okay. You had mentioned the total number of instructional hours in the state standard. How many, I know we had some time built in this year. We're usually, how much extra time do we have built in?
Into the proposed calendar? 40 hours, which would be over 6 days.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. And thank you I did not know so much work went into putting together a calendar. So thank you to you and the committee for this excellent work.
All the credit goes to a really good team.
So we have received a few emails, I think, from teachers who really like the current ability to release 25 minutes earlier. What's going to happen with that going forward? I understand that that's not reflected here in this calendar. So can you just comment on what
Sure.
your thoughts are?
Well, the most direct comment is that's not built into this calendar. And I think we're all hoping we don't run into the same level of stress and chaos via the pandemic. And so we can return to more normality. What I would add to that really direct response is we did because we've received some similar feedback. So one of those 5 proposed calendars was actually a calendar in which I believe 178 days of student direct instruction teaching time was built into the day. Right. So in other words, we took that premise. What if we had our day really stripped down to what it looks like now? How many days would we need to have for teacher time? And what would that calendar look like? That was actually option number 5 of the 5 calendars we brought back to the committee. And while it did receive some comments like, hey, I really appreciate where this is coming from, and our staff have voiced the desire for this, getting out that late in June is not desired. And the feedback we got was to move more in this direction. But I appreciate the question because it offers the opportunity to say, yes, we did put together a draft calendar that would have reflected that. It had significantly fewer we had the bare minimum of professional development that we are required by code to offer. Again, trying to fit all the other things into a calendar that has that many student contact days and stuff. There weren't any work days for staff at the end of the semester for grades. There weren't any days for preparing for parent-teacher conferences, and we still were going pretty late into June. So again, I think there was appreciation for the idea that, yes, you've heard the voice but the way it translated out in a year-long calendar was not desired.
I was interested, what did the student voice contribute and how did that get reflected? I'd just be interested to know what students think of the calendar.
Sure. There was a lot of, I like this, to be really frank. One of the things that we're going to want to be cognizant of to honor that student voice is, when do we schedule prom? When do we schedule homecoming? And so one of the pieces was, if you're going to have professional development on Mondays, is it possible that you could have a professional development on the Monday following prom? That would be really nice for me as a student to miss instructional time. I think it's a very cognizant suggestion, right? Like, I don't have to miss instructional time, but yet I get a little bit of extra time. So that would be a way that we could schedule our activities to be really respectful of that student voice.
As a parent, I would love not to have to get my child up on that Monday too. So I would encourage you to find a way to do that. Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
I have just a question that probably Chris, Paula, Sabrina, do we have to have a public hearing on the calendar? Why do I feel like we have had it? We have, okay. So we won't approve
Yeah.
this tonight, right?
Yeah, that's
So
a
it-
good point. I didn't even think about.
I'm sorry,
that.
this just dawned on me.
You don't have to be sorry.
It just, yeah, until
So we
she
have to
said it,
set
it didn't
a-
dawn on me either.
So we would
But we
have to
do have
set
that.
a public hearing.
Well,
It just dawned. I'm
so
sorry.
we do have to have a
I didn't
public
even-
hearing. It acts different than most of my public hearings where I have to publish
No,
and
yeah,
has to be
yours-
10
yeah.
days. So this would need to come back to the next board meeting, have a public hearing at the beginning of the meeting and act on it then, yeah.
So we don't have to have an action item to set a public hearing?
No,
Okay.
It's okay, even though I had asked, you remember, we kind of, once we got down to this last draft, we sent it out pretty broadly. I'd asked for feedback to come to me on a certain time frame so that I could incorporate it however needed to be prepared to present to you tonight. Everybody has busy lives, and so not every piece of feedback was able to get to me on that time frame. So more time just means we'll have more opportunity to get valuable input and incorporate and have the best possible calendar. I will tell you, one of the suggestions that came in pretty recently was, hey, this represents some pretty new ideas. Are we sure we want to approve 2 years worth of calendar? Shouldn't we wait for 1 year to see how it goes? And I'll leave that to you as a board to determine whether or not you'd prefer to approve 2 years with the possibility of maybe needing to make an adjustment if things don't go well, or whether you'd just rather approve 1 year at a time, right? But both of the calendars are grounded in that same process, in those same priorities, with lots of stakeholder voice.
What was the logic from the district's perspective for the 2 years? I know from a family perspective why that would be helpful, but was there something from staff that was useful for?
No, quite frankly, I just think the more quickly we can put the calendar out, the more we can communicate early and let people plan for things. I know in the last couple of years, we've made adjustments mid-year, which has been difficult for families. I think if we can get to a calendar that's grounded in our priorities and really schedule that out, there's really I don't see any reason why we can't be there. I hope that's not too forward of me to say. And I think it just provides our staff and our community something that they can kind of rely on, if you will. But there wasn't anything strategic in that decision. It was just about trying to get information for our community. Sorry.
I just wondered if you would envision a 2-year approval process that you approve for the next 2 years, then in 2 years you approve. Is that how you would?
Here's where my mind is at this point.
Okay.
Based on the conversations we've had the minimal conversations that I've had thus far with Dr. Lawson, I know some of the important work that we'll be doing as he comes on board is strategic planning work.
Yeah.
And so, barring any changes that I think are implications or we think systemically are implications of that strategic planning work, right? If our strategic plan were to come out in such a way that would say, man, we really need to be using time differently than we currently are, then you might hear me coming back to you saying, oh, wait a minute, we want to make some changes. If there are no implications that way, then yes, I would love to get into a cycle where routinely we're doing a process to say, okay, this is what our priorities were 2 years ago. We've lived 2 years now. Has anything shifted? Let's really, again, kind of start from scratch, make sure we're really including people's voices and experiences and building a calendar that our community can see going into the future, at least 2 years at a time. I just gave you an either or answer,
Yep.
I know, but I think it would be
Super fair.
naive not to recognize that potentially our strategic plan may have influences that we want to incorporate into the calendar.
So you're saying we're going to be planning 2 years at a time into the future, but what I actually hear you, I think you're saying is that we're going to be planning 2 years into the future, but not necessarily 2 years at a time, right? Because this year we're planning 2 years, but next year we'll only be planning, 2024, 2025, right?
Yeah.
So we would be planning 2 years out.
Yeah,
not
we can
2 years at a
accomplish
time.
this in several ways. We can plan every year as a team, but plan the calendar a year in advance. Again, I would really like to see where the conversation goes. I don't know in my experiences, I've seen too many strategic plans that impact a calendar. So I'm really kind of being overly cautious in my answers and my approach to this. I just don't want to paint ourselves into a place where the strategic plan does have a calendaring implication. But yes, this provides us an opportunity to have a very inclusive, very community-driven process where we can see that moving into the future.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Hawkins.
You're very welcome.
And let's see, we don't have anyone on the sign up for public comment on the calendar. And as Director Franzen noted, we will have a public hearing on the calendar at the next meeting. So just check for hands raised, and seeing none, we will go ahead and move on to our policies for discussion.
So yeah, most of these were updates based on IASB recommendations. A couple that I wanted to bring everyone's attention to. One was the 202.5, the student school board representative, which I believe is a policy we have. It's restructured to reflect IASB, and an option that we have that I think that we might want to explore actually implementing in the near future. The idea being that we would work with staff to select a student that would start on the board in the fall. Is that what we were, okay. It's like, I think that's what we discussed. So that would be something we want to move on after approving this policy at another point, or work with staff. And then the other one I wanted to draw your attention to was the naming new facilities, since we do have a new high school. If we have any comments, any points of discussion for this item that might be timely to talk about now.
Is this an IASB model for the naming?
For the what?
The naming. I know that this tends to be one you want to have maybe a little bit more detail on, because it can be very contentious and emotional when it comes up. The community has gone through several of these in other places around the community that have been very, very contentious. I just wondered if there's a model we could find that might have a little bit more meat to it to give some guidance. Because effectively this policy kind of says staff's responsible for coming up with a recommendation, and then the board can do kind of whatever it wants. Which I'm fine with. That seems
I guess my question
problematic.
is, what additional meat are you looking for?
Yeah, and this is, I just want to make sure, this was this is the IASB model,
It is.
Yeah.
which does it have more meat than our current policy, or is it about the same? I couldn't remember if the change was very
This
significant.
one is a little bit less.
This is less detailed than our
Okay.
current policy.
I mean, thinking about the city ones I've seen, more meat would be things like, how do people from the community submit ideas? How do they provide support for that idea? How to take into account that you can't just have a company donate a ton of money and name a building. So that money isn't the driver versus community involvement. I don't know.
So this might be a time where, as a board, you might want to say, we would like to actually see a regulation before we're ready to say that this is the policy we want to adopt. I think some of what you're raising probably are the operational details. Or you could also say, I don't know that now's a good time because they're pretty busy, but like the facilities committee, at some point, this could be one that we'd ask them to help work on to develop that regulation. It could go a couple different ways.
Yeah, and I don't know if I have a strong opinion. I've simply lived through some of those community ones, and they're tough. And looking at this policy, I could see how all the things that caused problems in the past in the community would totally be able to come up with this one.
Yeah, I guess I share the same thought of, I'm not sure what meat we could add. I think it's just it just feels like it can be a difficult issue regardless of, you could define it so far that then you create additional problems by, structuring it too rigidly. I don't know.
But maybe it would help us, like Dr. Vincent suggested, to understand how the staff would develop these regulations. I don't know, maybe that would, how hard is that? How much effort is that going to take, Dr. Vincent, in the near future?
You know, the regulations, several of the policies require that, and we try to work on those within a couple week time period after you actually say this is the policy direction we're headed. I don't think it's a huge issue. This one does get very emotional very quickly, but we could certainly take a stab at that building from the current policy that's on the books.
So, do I read this as saying that we will only name a building after somebody who's either deceased or retired from the district?
That's the recommendation of IASB, and there's good history around why that might be.
Okay.
Well, and actually just says we'll give higher preference.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where one of the very difficult forks become is what if you have somebody that gives a ton of money that's still alive?
Right.
And how does that play in? And
Well, and
There's some legal guidance there too.
yeah,
So if it's an individual, that's different, but we can't sell naming rights to facilities that are financed with tax exempt bonds. So usually that's why it's an individual and not a company. So you couldn't,
So actually, the second to last sentence of the first paragraph reads, a minimum of 5 years must have elapsed from the retirement or death of individuals for their names to be considered for naming a building, and a minimum of 1 year for naming a subunit. So that suggests that it actually is a requirement, not a recommendation. It's a confusingly worded.
yeah, because
Policy.
the sentence before it doesn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm
Yeah.
looking at, no, yeah, I'm looking at the wrong one.
Well, we don't have to keep talking about it here, but
I would say, I guess if there's input on what challenges you've seen in other areas, that we could try to brainstorm that and bring that into policy and share that with staff.
I might take a look at what the Ames City Council adopted for naming of park and recreation facilities. They went through about 9 months of work on something there for similar type of things. I'm not sure if there's something there we could pull.
So we would pull then this policy from moving towards action items next meeting? That's what I'm hearing.
Well, theoretically, we could bring it back still as an action item with additional information.
We could
Also
also
do
do that.
You
could bring those.
Because you don't take action on it until the second reading, and you can decide then whether you're ready to take action or if you still want more work.
And we could have it on our next policy committee agenda. So we have one, what, next week?
Next week.
Next week? Right, yeah, every two, yeah. So we'll have the opportunity.
Can we go back to talk about the student participation in school board meetings policy? It's not clear to me if this is talking about a single member or two members. I mean, so the first pair, under scope of policy, we say the board shall invite up to 2 non-voting participants from the student body to attend regular board meetings. The next sentence is in the it seems to be in the singular.
I think the idea was, well, first of all, it was something that was passed right before COVID, so
Right.
it didn't get off the ground. But the idea was that you could have up to 2, but since we were just starting out, we would just have 1 to start out with. Is that right, Elisa?
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember, yes, but I'm also trying to remember because we shifted this from our policy into IASB. So I want to make sure that so I'm reading the, yes, because in our original policy, we put include at least 1 non-voting representative. And so that, I think that you are correct. That matches my recollection. But again, it was utilizing IASB's verbiage, and we did pull in, staff did pull in some additional information that was very helpful because our initial policy on this was quite brief. So
Another consideration sometimes is you just think about the busy life of a high schooler. If they can share that with a partner, sometimes it
Right.
opens it up to more students to say, yes, I can make that commitment if I am committing maybe to one meeting a month, or maybe I do like a quarter. It was just trying to leave maximum flexibility to allow that to be as open as possible for students.
Okay. I mean, all of this sounds fine. I think that we should clear up the language so that it's clear whether we're talking about one or two, because there's like a funny transition from talking from language in the plural to language in the singular. You could just change it to a student school board representative, because then it could. Yeah, I think that we're to me, that says student school board participant eligibility, as in the students that would be eligible, these are the requirements, not that we would only have one student. Right.
And then, given that this one relates to the board, I know, well, two things. I know from previous discussions when this first came up, you tend to want to select a student that, or students that are not like, you don't just select the most popular kid in the high school or the president of this student body. You try to find a way to reach out to find somebody that's really representative of a wider group. Mm-hmm. I think given that, and given the interaction they'd have with us, this might be one where I'd be interested in seeing the administrative rules as far as having the board give some input to the process by which we're finding this student or students, so that we have an understanding, because they'll be interacting with us, but also so it kind of serves towards the goals we have as a board for the input that student's able to give back. But I'm fully supportive of doing it.
And that is, I think that is something we talked about in the committee meeting as well, is we would work with staff to figure out what those criteria look like. And yeah, we don't just want the valedictorian as nothing against the valedictorian.
And staff were processing through with some ideas with us and sharing what some other school districts had done. And that was very helpful to hear that information, since this is something new to us.
All right, any other comments on the policies for discussion? And any comments from the public on the policies for discussion? Okay. We will move on then to our public forum, and I will read our statement on public comments. Residents of the district, students attending the district, parents or guardians of students attending the district, and district staff members may address the board about any topic relevant to the district, whether on the current agenda or not. Those who wish to speak must sign up at the beginning of the meeting. Speaker participation is limited to 3 minutes once per item. The views and opinions of citizens addressing the board do not necessarily reflect those of the board, district administration, or staff. Speakers are to remember that Iowa law prohibits the board from discussing specific employees, students, or their performance. Student speakers will state their name and school. Others will state their name and address. And we do have a few individuals on the list tonight. The first one is, and I'm so sorry if I say your name wrong, Nyamat Chop. And you can come right on up to the microphone here.
Yeah.
Yep. Right there.
Okay, I'm ready. My name is Naimat Chop, and I'm a freshman at Ames High School. Dear board members, we would like to first address the misunderstanding of our recent suspension. 2 weeks ago, 5 of us were suspended for 5 days. None of us were involved in a physical altercation with other students. Consequently, we have come to an agreement that what took part in our suspension was not following the administrator's instructions to go to the office with peers to de-escalate the situation. We were told at the time to either go to class or leave the building. Some of us returned to class and the others went into student services office where we'd been asked to de-escalate. All of us were suspended and sent home. This feels unethical because we are freshmen who do not have open campus or cars and cannot safely leave the building. Our parents had not been notified and we had no rights to leave for home. It felt like they did not care about us as students, but only wanted us out of the building. We were told that an administrator wanted us to speak to us about things that had happened and led to the conflict that we were involved in, but no one ever gave us an opportunity to share our side of the story. Instead, they only said that we were suspended and to go home. While we were suspended for escalating a conflict and not complying with the instructions, no one ever cared enough to understand that we were yelling and running because another student was threatening us and approaching us with mace. This is the second time that a student that this student had threatened us with mace. Earlier, a fight had happened between two other students that involved significant violence, such as pushing, punching, dragging down the stairs, and the teacher was hurt in the process. The students involved in the situation received fewer days suspension than us 5 Black girls. And 2 of the students that got suspended aren't here.
Thank you. Saya Triplett? Oh, sorry, make sure you say your name for me though, okay?
Hello, my name is Willow Johnson, and I'm a freshman at Ames High School. We bring this situation to your attention because we feel like it is reflective on how we are treated within the school on a daily basis. We feel that we have been targeted since the beginning of the school year. We feel like consequences are given to Black students that are more severe than white students who do the same thing and don't get in trouble for them. An example for this is recording fights. Students of all ethnicities have recorded fights when they take place by white students really get in trouble for it. My mom had asked for a rubric that was created several years ago that laid out the offenses and the consequences, and she was not provided this. These need to be transparent. I find it interesting that administration is not a part of these board meetings. It's hard for myself and peers to come up and speak, that it's embarrassing that we should even be having this conversation because this is a human rights issue. As we're growing up and developing, we're faced with choices and decisions. One decision that I have to face, or that we all have to face with every day, is that whether or not I should walk with friends that look like me. I was told by Ms. Patton personally to stay away from those types of people, quote unquote, who just happen to look like me. I will leave you with this. As you exit the board meeting, think about who's walking next to you and being held responsible for their actions. I'm standing here not asking for fairness, but I'm demanding equity.
Thank you, Willow. Go ahead, just let us know your name. That's fine, yep.
My name is Cameron Blakes, and I'm a freshman in 9th grade at Ames High. What we were asking to change is how students of color is treated differently than white students at Ames High. We feel like the administration is often targeting Black students and that they approach Black students in an inappropriate way. We also think starting at the next school board meeting at the Ames High administrators should share the discipline data from Ames High School every week at the school board meeting. This data will show uneven numbers of people of color that is either suspended or alternative education settings compared to other races. We feel like this cannot be justified showing this data because this is showing a lot about how Black students are being treated in this school, and this is an example of systematic racism. We also feel that there should be a mediator between Ames High School students and administrators. When a disciplinary situation happens, that person should be someone that should be someone who students trust to advocate for them, who they choose to represent them in discussions making about consequences. We would also ask that all teachers and administrators at the Ames High School be trained in restorative justice. This will allow us to have discussions about what led to conflict and what we should think that should respond next.
Thank you, Cameron.
This is not the first time the Ames Community School District has put on racist acts. Students are supposed to feel safe and welcome in this school, but us, as Black students, we feel like we and our peers are targeted, dehumanized, belittled when we are just trying to come to school and learn. Doing standard teenager things such as laughing and talking with our friends we can't even do because administration and teachers call us loud and obnoxious. They always look at us in a certain type of way, even though it's an everyday thing, but they always stare at us Black students.
My name is Saya Triplett, and I'm a freshman at Ames High School. What we are asking for is an apology from all staff that were involved, as well as the assistant principal and the assistant superintendent. We do not feel that the consequences that we were given were fair. However, an empty apology will not be enough for these issues. We need to see change. We are trying to change the way students of color are treated compared to students of other races at Ames. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Saya. All right, we do not have anyone else signed up as part of our public forum, so I will go ahead and close our public forum, and we will move on to our consent items. And first, I'm going to have Chris Stensland make a correction to the personnel report.
I apologize, board. I didn't give good enough instructions, I think, to the HR office on Dr. Lawson's extra days. And so I just want to clarify how that should read. It's really as a consultant. It's frowned on to have two superintendents under contract at one time, so we are not issuing a 20-day contract to him in May. It should be a consultant for up to 20 days at $909.81 effective February 9th of 22. So we'll get that change made when we do it for the minutes, but that'll be part of how the motion how you should consider it as part of your motion. Thank you.
So I would move that we approve the consent items with those changes to be incorporated.
Second.
Okay, moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Franzen, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Vincent for gifts to the district.
Thank you. We have 4 gifts that we want to express our appreciation for this evening. They are primarily, well, a couple are cash gifts and a couple are gifts in kind. First, the family of Timothy R. Jenks. Second, the Collegiate United Methodist Church and Wesley Foundation. We also have a gift from the ISU WC Give and the ISU Block Builders. And the gifts are for the Hope Pantry as well as contributions towards cross-country uniforms for the girls and the boys at the Ames Middle School. We very much appreciate these contributions and the generosity that they represent.
Thank you. All right, it was moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Franzen to accept to approve the consent agenda with the changes noted by Chris Stenslin. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 6-0. And moving on to our action items, we will pull the calendar off of here. So our first item will be our 2022-23 board meeting schedule.
I move the board approve the 2022-23 board meeting schedule as presented.
Second.
Moved by Franzen, seconded by Becker. Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Passes 6-0. Resolution approving the applications for the purpose of applying for community betterment grants from Prairie Meadows.
I move the board approve the resolution regarding the approval of the application for the purpose of applying for the community betterment grant from Prairie Meadows.
Second.
Moved by Franzen, seconded by Winfrey, and we'll have a roll call vote for this one.
Director Winfrey? Aye. Director Beerbaum?
Aye.
Director Becker?
Aye.
Director Shields Cook?
Aye.
Director Smith?
Aye.
Director Franzen?
Aye.
Passes 6-0. Policies for action.
I move the board approve the policies as presented.
Second.
Moved by Winfrey, seconded by Franzen. Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Passes 6-0. New high school construction project change orders.
I move the board approve the change orders for the new Ames High School construction project as presented.
Second.
Moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Franzen. Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Passes 6-0. Board and staff items. Items from the board. In terms of requests for staff, we just have, I think, the couple of things on policy.
Yes.
Anything else I missed? Okay. Any other items from the board?
This is a little off the cuff, but it is Public School Celebration Week. I'm not going to get the appropriate title, but the 21st to the 24th is identified as that. And I will speak for myself as a volunteer representing a public school district that I think it is very important that we continue to do what we can do to provide the excellent level of public education that we can in this state. I continue to be quite concerned with some of the things that are entertained at the state level that I believe may impact the quality of public education in this state. So I just wanted to go on the record in saying that I am proud to be a part of the public education school system in this state.
Thank you, Director Franzen. Items from the superintendent.
Just very quickly, you notice that we are transitioning the way that we report around COVID in the district. As of today, we have 10 students and 2 staff that are currently identified. And we are still in a high transmission rate. As the access to data shifts, we also would recommend that we shift how we provide information to the community. And so we don't have the information to do so, so we'll no longer send the notifications in the same manner, and that will begin tomorrow. You've probably noticed already that other community providers have shifted some of their notifications, going from a daily basis to more of a weekly basis. But we will maintain the dashboard. So if someone is really interested, that information is there. We just will not be sending the string of emails that some of you have commented you've received as we've gone through the fall. We'll all keep our fingers crossed that we truly are in that downward slide, right? So
Fingers crossed. So Paula, just to make sure I understand what you said, are we no longer, I'm no longer going to get the email from Ames Middle School that says there are 3, in parentheses, 3 individuals who tested positive for COVID-19 in your building?
that's correct.
Okay. I hadn't understood that.
Will we still be doing the emails for in the classroom, or those close contact?
If we had a case where we knew that it was really important, and we had some other procedures in place, that could still happen, but as a routine basis, we will not.
Okay, thank you.
We could have a few situations across the district where it still will be very critical, and we know where those are.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. All right, the board planning calendar. Our next meeting will be March 7th at 5:30 p.m. We will have our work session around budget on that meeting. Any other questions on the board planning calendar? Okay, then we will take a 5-minute break and we will move into our work session. And at this time, we will be ending the broadcast of our meeting. So thank you for joining.